I will do whatever it takes to get you back. Honey, I love you. And I want you back so bad.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, we're going to look at how did Suzanne Morphew die, and we're going to approach this question by looking at it in three different dimensions. The first one being profiling Barry Morphew. Secondly, going through criminal intertextuality, and I'll explain that in a moment, and then also statement analysis. Now, obviously, we know very, very little. There's not even been an affidavit released, and that is really the challenge. The challenge is, what can we know at this point? What can we figure out based on so little information? You might call it thin slicing. And so that is really the challenge. The challenge is to come up with something based on very, very little information. And I was certainly thinking about this last night, and it's very hard work. You've got to concentrate, you've got to try and assimilate, integrate, synthesize information. You've got to try and join dots. You've got to concentrate on finding patterns in the noise. And you've got to differentiate between seeing what you are seeing through your own mind, through the prison of your own mind, and seeing what is actually there, letting the facts, letting the crime scene, letting the people speak for themselves. On Mother's Day, that's tomorrow, which is the 1-year anniversary of Suzanne Morphew's death, we're actually also going to be looking at Shanann, another mother who lost her life. We're going to be revisiting Mother's Day on Shanann's Facebook page, Shanann Watts' Facebook page. So that's something to look forward to tomorrow. So if you're interested in that and you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So the right way to begin this process is to develop a profile of Barry Morphew, is to look at his identity, look at the kind of person that he was. And so that's not something that you can do in a 10-minute video or a 20-minute video. It's something that really requires hours and hours, studying his backstory, speaking to people, finding out who he was as a school kid, who his parents were, what kind of friends he had, what kind of hobbies he had, what is his backstory, what stands out, what were the milestones, what were the ups and downs. And that is not what we're going to be doing in this episode. So that's quite a big chunk of the profile that is missing. We're also not going to go into the marriage. What was their marriage like? What were the ups and downs of the marriage? Because that is part of what made Barry into the man he ultimately was. The marriage, the children, the move to Colorado, which I think happened in 2018. And we're not going to go very heavily into the social media either, because that is also how someone presents themselves. Is how they present themselves has got to factor into how they self-identify. What I am going to go into are just two areas, and although I don't think it's complete, I think it's very incomplete just to focus on these two areas. They are two very big areas that relate to possible criminality. So the first area is, what did Barry do for a living? And the answer is that he was a landscaper. And you may have seen the arrow that I've pointed there. What happens with landscaping? You have objects, metal objects, penetrating the earth, reshaping the earth, damaging the earth, sculpting the earth, shifting the earth, but you basically have sharp metal objects from graders and so on that break the earth's surface, lift the earth, move earth around. And that is kind of an analogy in a way for what can happen to the human body. A human body can also be moved around, shifted, especially a dead human body. And I don't think there's any coincidence in the possibility that human remains were found on a property which and also possibly associated with with landscaping or developing. And I'm going to play a clip where Suzanne's brother talks about 3 alerts. Let's listen in.
Well, one of them's a riverfront. Another one is a tree planting. And the third one is an addition being put in, and the entrance area with blocks.
So you've just heard the brother of Suzanne Morphew talking about where cadaver dogs hit, not just one cadaver dog, but actually another one, confirming that. And one of them was on the property owned by Barry Morphew. It's kind of regrettable that he's not clearer in exactly where these hits were. I do think it's fairly clear, and I could be wrong here, but I think it's fairly clear that Andrew Moorman is talking about the property that borders on the river, and that was a property where they also were working on the riverfront there. And I think it's possible that that is where the dogs hit, and that's also where a neighbor to that property said, I think she said that she heard Barry or saw someone working on the site really late at night, I think around about midnight. Do you guys remember that? So I just think the landscaping is definitely a factor, and that is giving you an idea of one aspect to it. The other aspect to it is that Barry Morphew is an outdoors man, so he's someone familiar with the terrain, but he's also familiar with hunting. And on September 5th, 2017, so about 3 years, a little bit less than 3 years before her death, Mallory Morphew, their one daughter, posted, possibly on Instagram, not quite sure where, but she posted on social media, "My dad is my hero. If I don't find a bear slayin', mountain lion strangling, wilderness surviving man, I ain't marrying anyone." And there's actually a photo which I've provided in the video where you can actually see him. I presume that he slayed this bear, that he hunted this bear, and then also that he skinned a bear. And so you have someone who's not, who doesn't have a problem killing wild animals, doesn't, probably has several weapons at home for that purpose, and that probably includes firearms and also knives. Now, that you might think that takes us somewhere, but the fact that America as a whole is a country with quite a large gun ownership, it almost means that you could by default say, well, I guess the murder weapon is a gun. It's not necessarily the case, and then you might say, well, then isn't it a knife? And I think the better question to ask is, was this a case where blood was spilled or not, right? In other words, was this a case of something like manual strangulation where there was no blood spilled in the vein of Chris Watts, and we'll get to that in the intertextuality section, or was this a case where someone used their hunting prowess translated onto the human level? Was this the kill or the taking down of a human being using the same stealth, the same cunning, the same strategy, I guess? Obviously, if somebody trusts you, it's really no contest. But is it something that's the same? We do know in hunting that you want a clean shot, if you want to put it that way. And so, what happened here? Was this a case where hunting prowess was used, and if so, were the same weapons used, such as a gun or a knife or something like that? If you look at photos of Barry standing next to Suzanne, he's much bigger than her. But on the other hand, she was younger than him and also went to gym, and she was quite fit and healthy. She seemed quite healthy. And in a person-to-person tussle, it's difficult to say, what would have happened. But that is the question that we're sort of faced with, is would this have been something like the Chris Watts case, where there was no blood, where it was a physical contest, or something else where there was a weapon used. I'm inclined to think that blood was spilled, in the same vein as we saw in the Patrick Frazee case. And I think part of the problem that you've got to deal with now is you've got to look at the orientation of the home, and it's a huge home, and you've got to consider any scenario where there's something like a knife used, then you might have a scream. There's the likelihood of screaming early on. And so you've got to wonder, would the perpetrator be concerned about that, given the scenario that there are so few houses in the area? Not no houses. On the other hand, because it's quite quiet, because there's not a lot of vehicular traffic and so on, would a single scream kind of pierce the silence kind of thing? Another possibility is you might have someone in the area knowing that the neighbors were usually away for the weekend. Would they have been around between, say, 4 p.m. at midnight or earlier on in the afternoon kind of thing? Would they have known that the neighbors were around or not? And so that's quite an important question. We do know that the one neighbor was around, because she actually came to check whether the cars were in the garage and whether the bicycle was there. But the question is, would they have been around that evening? And would the Morphews have known that? I kind of have a thing nagging in my mind. It may be nothing, but if you think about the scenario, and this deals a little bit more with the statement analysis side, but the story that that Suzanne went for a bike ride, and then the bike is found under a bridge where apparently Suzanne fell down. She fell down kind of a slope, and then that is where something could have happened. And that seems to be possibly analogous to that steep stairway that you see in some of these Zillow images right next to the house. Now, that could be also a possibility where if they were going down for sundowners or something, and Suzanne was walking ahead of him, if he just kind of pushed her, right? If he just pushed her that she stumbled down there, that would already give him the advantage. In other words, if she sort of fell and she was already in a situation of being compromised because of being wounded from that fall, then whatever would happen next might come pretty quickly. So you could also have a combination of different things, in the same way that I don't think the body was just moved to one place. It was probably moved to several places. And what's quite clever with that sort of thing is someone who is watching the news, they can determine, okay, so the search has gone through that area, and once the search has gone through that area, they can then move the body to an area that's already been searched. Why would searchers go back to search the same area? But that is a good way to defeat a grid search pattern type search, right? Now, if you move on to criminal intertextuality, and that is a true crime rocket science ism, it's something, intertextuality basically means the coherence between texts, right? Between different, you could say, narratives or different words or whatever. But I've kind of hijacked that into the criminal sense, the true crime sense, and in the sense that criminals can learn from other criminals. And sometimes they do so deliberately, and sometimes you can see through one case into another case. And there have already been reporters now, like right now, following the arrest, talking about the similarities between Barry Morphew and Chris Watts in terms of the sermon on the porch and Barry Morphew speaking on Facebook. Now, I do find it quite interesting that Barry Morphew kind of interviewed himself. He put himself on Facebook. It shows that he cares about appearances, and it also shows he didn't allow the media to interview him. He interviewed himself, basically. It's kind of a prepared statement. And there's quite a lot to say about that in itself. I will deal with that in full at a later date, but there's quite a lot of him shaking his head as he's saying, I want you back. And it's quite similar to Chris Watts's words, something about want you back. And if you think about it in quite a global way, saying those words, you've actually got to listen to the statements to get the true sense of it. But, with Chris Watts, we know there was no coming back. I mean, by early Monday morning, his whole family were at Survey 319. There was no coming back for any of them. His wife was in a grave. His children were in the oil tank. So on the Tuesday, him saying, I want you back, please come back. I think he said that with a bit of duping delight, because there's no way that they were going to be able to get up or someone was going to bring them home. And yet he was saying that. But what I'm trying to get at is those words, come back. There was no coming back from where they were. And that, just the word come back, it's almost an admission already that you're somewhere that you can't come back from. There's no coming back from death, for example. And Barry Morphew uses the exact same words. Let's listen to that quickly.
Oh, Suzanne, if anyone is out there that can hear this, that has you, please, we'll do whatever it takes to bring you back. We love you, we miss you, your girls need you.
If you're out there, just come back. Like, if somebody has her, just please bring her back. I need to see everybody. I need to see everybody again. This house is not complete without anybody here. Please bring her back.
So you may have noticed that I've highlighted the beards on, whether you want to call it goatees or beards, both on Barry Morphew's face and Chris Watts's face. I mean, that's just a superficial similarity. What we really want to know is how more similar were these men in their temperaments, in their habits. And I think one obvious area to sort of go into is something as simple as neatness. Chris Watts was quite a neat guy, quite an anal fellow. He would do his wife's laundry, and he was often pretty clean and well groomed for an oil worker. You wouldn't have thought that he was an oil worker, and so was their home, and then you've got to. And then the crime scene, of course, is also very clean, just very cleaned up. And then you've got to compare that side to things to Barry Morphew. Now, I get the sense that both of them were quite fit. Their appearances meant quite a lot to them. But I don't think it's quite at the same level. And I think I get the sense that Barry is a less clean fellow, or a less neat fellow than Chris Watts, in the sense that, we've heard quite a lot about this chlorine, that there were towels lying all over the room and that there was chlorine, this heavy chlorine smell. And it's not really a lot to go on, but if you look at the Watts home, the police really struggled to find anything, and then they did ultimately find a little bit of I guess let's call it debris or detritus on the bed sheets. But for all intents and purposes, they found very, very little. And the other thing is the cadaver dogs came up with virtually nothing in the Chris Watts case. Not nothing, but not much. And it feels like there's more in terms of that in the Barry Morphew case. It might be unfair to say because no cadaver dogs were actually taken to the well site, and there's some confusion about whether they were allowed in the vehicle or not. So I don't know if it's like comparing apples to apples. But ultimately, I think when we ask this question about criminal intertextuality, you've got Chris Watts, who's quite a modest man. He's quite a mild-mannered man. He's quite a soft-spoken man. He's reserved. He's kind of an introvert. And he commits a kind of introverted crime. The whole crime is silent. I don't believe there was an argument that morning. The crime itself is literally just squeezing the life out of his family, right? And I think that is an analogy for the crushing debt burden that he was perceiving. So I think he was perceiving the life being crushed out of him through this colossal debt, this colossal debt elephant sitting on him. And I'm just saying, in his psychology, that is how how it manifested, how the crime, how the dynamics that were present in the home manifested in the crime, right? And I think you've got some of the same elements with Barry Morphew. You've also got, I think, crushing debt. I don't know how much landscape developers make. I don't know what their mortgage scenario was like. In fact, there's a lot we don't know, but it feels like there was also a financial strain going on. There's something else I also want to talk about. I'm not going to talk about it too much here because it still requires more research, but I do get a sense from the social media, from certain clues here and there, that Suzanne was quite a religious lady, and I think her children as well. I don't know to what extent that had an impact on Barry. I don't know what his beliefs are or were. He certainly doesn't mention them during his appeal, right? During his appeal on Facebook. But one sort of wonders whether that Suzanne's beliefs didn't have a impact on what he could and couldn't do, on what he felt he was allowed to do, because it really depends. Some beliefs can be liberating and affirmative, and some can be you can have a sense of being controlled by them, right? It can be quite constricting, depending on which side of the fence you're on. But the whole issue we're dealing with here is just the sense of frustration that Barry may have been experiencing. And I'm certainly not justifying him. I'm trying to just understand possibly what is going on. And although this doesn't really relate, because, I stumbled upon an interview by Ed Kemper, who's one of the most intelligent serial killers, if not the most intelligent. Just what's quite fascinating with that is how articulate he is in talking about these feelings of frustration that he had with his family, and that frustration was borne out in the crimes that he was committing. That probably means nothing to a lot of people unless you're the one feeling that frustration, unless you know what that frustration feels like. And of course, some people don't know how to deal with that frustration. Some people don't know how to channel it, or to, whether you want to say get a divorce or whatever it is. Some people just simply don't feel like they have the social skills or whatever it is to deal with it. And Ed Kemper was one of them. But I think you have a similar situation of frustration with Barry Morphew, certainly in the finance area. But again, the question is, does the pendulum swing more towards a Chris Watts type of crime, which is there's no blood, it is a physical contest, it is a hands-on physical contest, or does it swing more to the other way, like Patrick Frazee, where there seems to be a heck of a lot of frustration? And bear in mind, Patrick Frazee was also an outdoorsman, and there was just an absolute gratuitous lots and lots of blood in that. And, someone like Patrick Frazee would have been used to dealing with killing animals. He probably hunted as well. We don't know that for sure, but being a rancher, a lot of those people shoot deer and are used to that kind of thing, and it's not such a big deal to them. The question is, which side does Barry lean? Is he more like Chris Watts, or is he more like Patrick Frazee? And there are different ways of kind of skinning a cat. On the one hand, you can say, well, he's similar to Chris Watts in the sense that Chris Watts gave a sermon on the porch, and he did something similar, and Patrick Frazee didn't. You could say that, but on the other hand, Barry Morphew didn't take a lie detector test, and he seemed smarter than Chris Watts in other ways. And, where Chris Watts was basically caught and everything dealt with in 2 or 3 days, it's taken almost a year just to arrest Barry Morphew. So in that sense, he's certainly done a lot better than Chris Watts, and maybe he's smarter, or maybe he actually learned from watching these other perpetrators and decided, well, burning's not a good idea. And, maybe if Chris Watts had used social media, that could have helped. And we do know, based on Andrew Moorman, that someone was on Suzanne Morphew's Facebook at around about midnight, adding a lot of friends his age. And one's got to wonder what is going on then. Bear in mind, a hunter is sly and strategic. A hunter's got to be very careful in stalking its prey. And I think that slyness is common to all human predators of other humans. They are thinking things about other people, damaging things, dangerous things, deadly things, while those people are moving around them. And then that slyness grows and creeps in. And I think that is part of it as well. So, like I said, I've got in my mind this idea of him pushing Suzanne down those stairs. But there are other possibilities as well. We know that he took her out for a sandwich or something into town, just around about 4 o'clock. That was the last time she was seen. So could it be something associated with eating? Could it be something associated with drinking something? Could something have been slipped into her drink? And so it's possible that the chlorine was meant to destroy other chemical evidence. I'm not convinced, though. I do think that the fact that Barry's a landscaper, and also the fact that he's a hunter, he's used to pressing metal objects into, like the body of the earth. And so I wonder if that's not what he would have done here. I think what was done here was what was the most practical from his point of view. And that brings us to statement analysis. And the statement analysis, I think, potentially takes us a little bit further along the equations I've already laid out. So the first thing to deal with is the story which Barry Morphew himself came up with, is that she went for a bike ride, and that what that is already conceding is that she was moving fast when whatever happened to her. So in other words, she was on some kind of vehicle, probably moving downwards or something, when something happened to her, and through that description you can kind of anticipate something like blunt force trauma, right? And again, that is why I have a sense of those stairs, but it could also be based on the bicycle story. But it could also be, you don't have to, we might imagine that the death is instantaneous. So she was either shot or she was stabbed or poisoned or something, and it was just like that, and then she died. But you could also have it as a 1-2 process. For example, she's hit over the head or something, and then suffocated or something like that, or she is to some extent sedated and then whatever. It doesn't necessarily need to be one thing. I don't know whether murderers and killers aren't very intelligent people. That is a fact. They've done studies on it that, in fact, criminals overall are less intelligent than the rest of us. And it just shows how maladaptive they are. When they're dealing with a problem, they don't know how to solve it, and they tend to gravitate towards some kind of crime just because they don't know how to solve things the way ordinary civilians do, right? And a lot of that is just because they are lacking in ordinary intelligence. So if we look at this case, we might see, and I hate to say it, but we might see an effective scenario or an effective execution. But, you're also dealing with someone who's not that smart. And he might just be thinking, and he does say it, I think, once or twice in his interview with himself, I guess, on Facebook. He says, I'll do whatever it takes. And to me, that speaks a little bit to the practical nature of an execution that is, I guess, quick, right? Something like being shot would be quick, and it would be something that he would be familiar with. Now, although that makes sense, it's difficult to know what the acoustics are of the house vis-a-vis the other houses in the neighborhood, and whether people in that neighborhood would pay any attention to sounds like that. Would you mistake that for a tree falling over or a tree being chopped, that cracking sound? Often we hear, even in the shooting at King Soopers, where people are standing right beside someone who is shooting other people, they hear popping noises. You don't necessarily think that a sound like that is a gunshot, but it is always a risk, I think, to do something like that, because it's going to be a sound that if someone does hear it, it's going to provide time of death, and then where were you when that sound was heard? So that can be a risk. But there's also a risk related to a stabbing injury, screaming, and someone potentially fighting back and all that kind of thing. Obviously, in the case of a trusted person, so in this case a spouse, the perpetrator has the upper hand because he's got the element of surprise. Any moment he decides she's got her back turned to him or whatever, he can decide to do whatever he does, and then he's got the advantage, right? The other things that were mentioned besides the bicycle were the talk about a mountain lion taking her, and I'm not sure if it was mentioned that she was possibly struck by a car, but both of those are suggesting some kind of physical injury where you would expect there to be blood. And I credit Andrew Moorman for saying that, I'm not sure if it's Moorman or Moorman, but for saying that, you would expect to see a blood trail. And I think he mentions Barry's an excellent tracker, but you'd expect to see a blood trail if an animal kind of is involved, right? But the fact that you would say something like a mountain lion suggests teeth going into skin and blood, right? If you're going to say something like a car accident or a bicycle fall, you'd also expect the breaking of the skin and all of that kind of thing. And so, if you want to be very specific, it does seem like it's something more violent than the Chris Watts case, but probably more effective than the Patrick Frazee case. So possibly something like blunt force trauma and then asphyxia. That could be one possibility. Just a final point to make, and I'm sorry that I've got to say it, but there does seem to be a possibility of dismemberment just because of the sites where human remains apparently have been found. Now, I don't know how accurate the statements are that we've received so far, but if you assume that they are, it means human remains were in different places. That could either mean all of the human remains were moved intact from A to B to C, or that some of the human remains were moved. And if it's the latter, then you could have a scenario of dismemberment. And if you look at that image of the bear, I don't think dismemberment is something that is out of the equation here, I'm sad to say. I think it's also possible that there's multiple methods of disposing of remains, and they can also include using the fireplace in a home. And something possibly happened between 4 p.m. and 5 a.m. the next morning. That's quite a long period of time. Not enough, I think it was long enough for cadaver odor to form, more than enough time. But the other thing I think Andrew Moorman said was that Barry Morphew said, I think he told the police a story that he was at home at 5 o'clock in the morning. Meanwhile, and this is according to the tracking of his vehicle, according to the tracking of his vehicle, he was already on the road at 4 a.m. or something like that. But I think he told police that he was at home at 5. And apparently he was sending messages or texts to people as well, which I think that data conflicted with where he was sending these messages from with the story that he was at home still at 5 a.m. or something like that. I must apologize just for, we don't have like an affidavit. We don't have a lot of information to go on. And there have been little spatters of information here and there over the past year. And so, we're only really going to get to the point where we've got clarity on a lot of this information when we get close to trial. In any event, what I wanted to demonstrate here is how you can start approaching a case like this, thinking about what we know in 3 different areas. So you're approaching it systematically, but from 3 different kind of perspectives, and seeing how certain things can kind of hold hands with one another. But let me ask you guys, and please leave your answers in the comments, what you think. Do you think that there was asphyxia? Do you think there was stabbing? Do you think there was shooting? Do you think there was poisoning? What is your theory at this point? And if you say something like that, provide some reinforcement. So if you say X, then because Y. Okay, let's do that. Just a final disclaimer, it is a case of innocent until proven guilty. So what we're doing right here is speculating on what may have happened given the charges that have been brought against Barry Morphew. And we'll see where the evidence leads us. So just a reminder, I'll be following this up on more on Barry's mistresses, and then we'll also be talking about Shanann's Facebook, what she entered about 3 years ago on Mother's Day. That's tomorrow. And then also I'll be doing a live stream at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on your theories on the Chris Watts case and what happened. And just think about that. We're thinking about what happened in the Morphew case with very little information. In the Chris Watts case, it's 3 years later, and there's still some lingering doubt about what really happened. And so you do get a sense that it's never too early to start thinking about what happened. I think, if anything, what is missing in a lot of this is thinking. People actually sitting down and applying their minds and trying to work out who these people are, how they operate, why they do what they do, and where everything took place and how it actually all fits together. So if you're interested in that, check out the live stream tomorrow. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.